Hello and welcome to the National FinTech Organization and this next installment in the series NFO's Growth Garage, Get Smart and Get Connected. Today, we'll hear from Paul Davis of Strategic Resource Management, Clayton Delaney of Finwello, Maria Lajewski of Financial Health Network, and John Wilson of the University of Connecticut as they discuss how FinTech can encourage healthier financial habits. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but the chat feature is available at the bottom of the window for comments and questions. Please give it a try now and let everyone know what part of the world you're connecting from, and as we go along, add your questions for our panelists. This session is being recorded and will be available on demand within the next few days on the NFO's YouTube channel. And now, I'd like to hand it over to Paul Davis to get us started. Paul?
Appreciate the introduction. Great seeing everybody populate the chat section. And just excited about this conversation today. My name is Paul Davis. I'm the Director of Market Intelligence for Strategic Resource Management. We're an advisory practice out of Memphis, Tennessee, that helps financial institutions find revenue opportunities as well as ways to cost cuts, which obviously is something that everybody is looking for, particularly in this current operating environment. But let me move on to our three amazing panelists. If you guys want to join us here, what I'm going to do is have Maria, John, and Clayton introduce themselves and start us off with their idea, their perspective on what they feel, what does financial well-being mean to them. So, guys, if you want to turn your cameras on. And Maria, why don't we start with you and work our way down the line?
Wonderful. Great to be here. Thanks for having us. I'm Maria Lajewski. I'm a director on the innovation team at the Financial Health Network. The Financial Health Network is a national nonprofit organization that unites business leaders, policymakers, and innovators to design and implement solutions that can improve the financial health of everyone in the U.S., but particularly low and moderate income individuals. Where I sit on the innovation team, our flagship program is called the Financial Solutions Lab, where we make investments in early stage fintech companies that we believe are aligned with our mission and bringing new products and services to the market that we think can measurably improve their end users' financial health. So to your question, Paul, how do we think about financial health? We really think of it as having daily financial systems that help one build resilience and pursue opportunities. Financial Health Network is part of a research organization, so we have further operationalized that definition. We have a number of survey tools that kind of help break down that definition of financial health. So we have a pretty simple 8-question survey that any provider can use that helps better understand how your end customers or your employees are spending, saving, borrowing, and planning for the future. And when we deploy the survey, and the survey that we deploy nationally is more than 8 questions. But when we deploy it nationally in our Pulse survey every year, what we found in 2022 is that less than a third of Americans are financially healthy, according to our framework. So they are struggling to spend less than they earn. They're struggling to pay their bills on time and in full. And they're struggling to have sufficient liquid and long-term savings. And I'm sure that, kind of these consumer insights will come across our conversation today. And just one other insight before I hand it back to you, Paul, is that we see consumers struggling kind of across income and other dimensions of identity. So when I said that our organization is really focused on financial health for all, it's really because this isn't just limited to low and moderate income households. We really see even households, above the 100,000 annual income mark also struggling financially. So looking forward to today's conversation and diving into more of this.
And definitely based on those parameters, I could see it being one of those cross-demographic issues as well. John, you want to join in?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name's John Wilson. I'm from the University of Connecticut, where I serve as academic director of our recently launched Masters of Science program in FinTech. We also just launched a in-person grad cert program in FinTech and are in the process of launching online versions of both those. When I am not doing that and I'm not teaching at University of Connecticut, I'm a consulting data scientist with LIMRA and also a consultant with InsurTech Hartford. Regarding your question about how I see financial wellness or how I would define it, I think of it as outcome oriented in 3 tiers. The first is, are we able to pay our bills as a family or as an individual? Can I simply pay my bills from week to week, month to month? The second tier of that is, I can pay my bills. Am I able to absorb a shock? If I'm able to absorb a shock, then the third tier is the one I think everybody tries to get to of, am I able to simply not have to think about financial wellness? I'm able to do what I want to do, generally when I want to do it, with little thought, because I do have the cushion, the wherewithal, and the discipline to take care of items number 1 and number 2. So that's sort of my perspective of financial wellness as a definition. And with our FinTech program, we are looking to think about not just the technology and not just the aspects of capital markets, but ingrain into our students how they need to talk to other people out there, how they need to think as individuals, and how they can impact the financial wellness across all demographics, as Maria alluded to. So that's my idea of financial wellness, and I look forward to a robust conversation today.
Fantastic. And last but not least, Clayton.
Thanks, Paul. I'm Clayton Delaney, CEO and co-founder at Finwello, where we've built a fintech as an employee benefit, working with employers to put a powerful tool into the hands of their employees that help them effectively tackle struggles that they may have in their financial lives and improve their financial wellness. For me, financial wellness is about recognizing that at its core, it's unique to every one of us. As we work with employers, we know that across that organization, how people approach money is as diverse as the workforce itself. So that means that for some, it might mean, as John alluded to, moving beyond living from paycheck to paycheck and making ends meet, while for others, it means planning for bigger commitments, right? So thinking about getting married, family trips, or retiring at some point in the future. And so for us, it's about being able to deliver a solution that helps meet people where they are, no matter where they are in life. I will touch on what Maria brought up with regards to demographics and kind of the income bracket side of things. One of the core things that we do differently is that we integrated a validated psychometric assessment into our platform, which allows us to understand where people are in terms of how they approach money. I think we can probably all think of someone who approaches money in a completely different way than we do, right? Maybe we're savers and it might be a spouse, a family member, a neighbor who's a spender, or vice versa. And so having that understanding, we know that it really isn't about how much money you make. It's really about how you're hardwired. If you're hardwired to be a spender, you may always be trying to keep up with the Joneses. And so the tools and solutions that we deliver to you need to understand that and help you given, right, kind of your natural way of approaching money. And so that, I guess, at its core is kind of what drives financial wellness for us. So I'll pass it back to you, Paul.
No, I appreciate that. And to bounce off of that idea, Clayton, I remember one time I was talking to a friend of mine, and we were talking about another person in our group, and the comment came up, this person has such a large house, and look at the 2 really nice cars they have. And my friend was going on, and then I said, yeah, I'm kind of curious what their debt load looks like, because keeping up with it, it's great to have nice things, but how are you financially supporting the things that you do have, right?
Yeah.
So, but let's talk a little bit about, one thing I want to kind of talk about is just kind of how we've gotten to where we are in 2023 in terms of financial wellness. I mean, obviously the concept has evolved considerably, particularly as technology has evolved as well. I mean, for example, I think of, several years ago, you really had to think to spend money, whether it was a cash transaction, writing out the check and actually writing out how much you were writing that check for, versus now it's just so easy to tap your credit card against the scanner or do something online. It's so much easier to spend money. So I assume that, along with other things, has created a different environment today than years past in terms of how you guys approach this concept. I was curious if somebody wanted to kind of give us a sense of how things are different now compared to even 5 to 10 years ago.
I can quickly jump in here.
Yeah, please.
Absolutely, Paul. Definitely easier to spend money. Kind of given where we are in this inflationary environment, it's just also much more expensive to afford even basic goods than they were just 5 years ago, or even just a few years ago. So that has changed dramatically, and I think is really affecting the balance sheets of households in dramatic ways. I had mentioned this financial health pulse survey that we put out every year. And in 2022, we actually saw that financial health around the country declined for the first time over the last 5 years. So we started the survey in 2018. Every year, we would see the number of financially healthy households uptick by a few percentage points year over year. 2022 was the first time that we actually saw a decline. And I think the inflationary environment had a lot to do with that. I think economic volatility in the markets, again, even high wage earners that may have had more of their assets in the market, saw a decrease and a decline there. And then also a lot of the government programs that were started during the pandemic to help vulnerable households came to an end. Things like expanded child tax credits, enhanced unemployment benefits, stimulus checks, et cetera. So we're kind of seeing this confluence in 2022 that just makes it, I think, a lot more difficult if you're already in kind of a precarious or tenuous financial position to kind of navigate through some of these just more macro level changes.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So I've been around long enough to kind of see, I remember in the 70s and 80s when back when I was young, it was typically a one earner household. Traditionally, it was the father that was earning the money. Mother would stay at home. That's the house that I grew up in. That's pretty much the house that all my friends grew up on. And then I started to see this evolution of 2-income households and the concomitant inflation that occurred as a result of that. And then you fast forward into the 80s and 90s and with .com, and you mentioned, people with their money in the market that perhaps didn't know what they were doing, and the big house and the 2 cars and the 2, jet skis and all that sort of stuff, and up to debt in their eyeballs. And that was the culture, and it was always sort of a worry about it later. And I think there were 2 big turning points, at least from my generation. 2008, we were getting close enough thinking about retirement, and a lot of people really, really took a beat down there that caused them to rethink what they spend their money on and how they want to allocate their resources. And then, of course, the pandemic that Maria alluded to, I think really, with so many people coming out of the workforce, and you heard about the Great Resignation, and maybe we can go on one income and just recalibrate how we live. And even if you look on TV and pop culture, the tiny houses and, as opposed to the McMansions, that sort of permeated into younger generations now. And I see a lot of my students, they kind of come from 2 perspectives. My American students, they are tentative because it was their parents that took the beat down in the 2008 to, pretty much 2008 to 2010, the Great Recession area. But my international students, they come from a different culture altogether. Many of them come from impoverished areas in India, Bangladesh, China. And their goal, they are literally risking everything to come over here. And financial literacy and financial wellness is topmost on their mind. They're looking to pave a better way and not only take the responsibility for their financial wellness, but for that of their family as well back home. So they look at it, they're very interested in it. Many of them have expressed an interest in going into a career that sort of serves the mission of financial literacy and financial wellness. And again, as an institution, we're looking to create an ecosystem that allows them to pursue that.
Yes, Clayton.
So I think maybe going in a slightly different direction, but still trying to answer the same question, maybe through the technology lens, in terms of some of the changes that we've seen. I think, for the most part, the promise of financial technology, the promise of fintech has been to, be able to help give people solutions and tools that they could use to better manage their financial lives. But what we've seen is a number of technologies explode right onto our phones. And so really the ability to manage our day-to-day financial lives is more complex than it has ever been. If we think about opening up our phones and looking at all the different financial apps that we have, if anything, fintech has really started to create a disconnect between all of the different components that come together to add up and impact our overall financial wellness. And so, while many of those tools are doing great things, from a behavioral perspective, the compartmentalization of all these various components is actually making it harder for us to, ultimately know what the right steps are to move ahead and take the right actions so that we can achieve the things that we want to achieve. And so I think, while it's been great to see all of these solutions come forward and they're all working in their own ways, what we'll likely see over the course of the next few years to the next decade is it's starting to come back together because of the disconnect that it's created for that end person who's just trying to get by at the end of the day.
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, good comment.
I was just going to say, I'd follow up with that. I think you're seeing that in developing countries with the notion of these super apps, where you can bring all kinds of lifestyle applications, including financial applications, together into a personal ecosystem, if you will, a virtual ecosystem. Obviously, the downside to that is what that means from a regulatory perspective, from a data protection perspective. That disconnect is good in that respect. It allows you to sort of keep things separate. I remember when I was young, they said never have your savings account at the same institution with your mortgage, right? There was these rules. Whether or not that takes root in the U.S. and in Canada and other markets, we'll have to see. But there definitely is this ebb and flow of technology, bringing things together, breaking it apart and decomposing it, and then bringing it back together. I think you're absolutely right. I think the coming back together so that people don't feel overwhelmed, like where do I go for all of these different things, is something that I think is going to be appealing to many people in the future.
Well, and that also comes back to, and I don't know if we really want to go down this rabbit hole, but the whole conversation about open banking and, giving consumers the ability to control their own data, right? I mean, you almost have to have a step in that direction, where in this country, we've kind of been a little bit behind other countries moving in that direction in order to facilitate that kind of scenario.
Yeah, that's true. But you are seeing movement. I mean, New York has fallen, California's fallen, Virginia's fallen in terms of things like CCPA and other GDPR type legislative schemas. Again, the notion of open banking and reserving and all that, we're seeing some lessons from the insurtech space that I think will translate to the fintech space. And I think those entrants into these neo-banking markets are finding, at least in big developed countries where you have a lot of capital that they're looking to tap into, it's a much bigger lift than they thought for a variety of reasons, regulatory being the big one.
Sure. Curious too, let's talk about the role of financial institutions, both traditional banks, credit unions, but also fintech, challenger banks. Curious, as we see the environment evolve as it does, what role do you guys see financial institutions, both young, established, and kind of challenger? What role do they play in the future of financial well-being?
Anybody want to jump on that one?
I think one of a big shift recently that we've seen on the financial institution side is overhauling overdraft policies at banks and credit unions, which I think has made significant improvements for their end users and customers. Again, FHN produces an annual spend report that looks at how much Americans spend on fees and interest on products like overdraft, for example. And we found, again, in 2022 that Americans were spending $11 billion on overdraft and non-sufficient fund fees. As we all know, these fees are really penalizing people who can afford them the least. They have challenges in kind of maintaining kind of a certain level in their bank accounts. And then they're charged these fees that are often hidden, all kinds of problems with it when you think about the consumer level. But we have seen banks actually, either through regulatory pressure or for brand visibility or for, kind of changing how they think about some of these policies, really start to think about how they can overhaul some of these practices. So Citi, most notably of kind of the top 5 banks, recently announced eliminating overdraft fees. And overdraft does allow you to continue to make that transaction, right? It allows it to go through and not get declined. And so to still offer their customers that option, what you can now do is link a Citi savings account. They can actually pull funds over from your account to kind of cover that differential. If the consumer, kind of sets up and opts in to that option. And we're seeing, Capital One, Discover, Ally, kind of others either have come before Citi or following in their footsteps. So I think that's one positive change we've seen on just the financial institution side.
Well, and I think even the CFPB in the last couple of days put out a report that said that overdraft NSF fees have actually come down 40% third quarter of 22 versus pre-pandemic. So that's something that's been steadily coming down, right, Maria? And as larger folks cap or rein in those fees, it puts more pressure on regional banks and then smaller financial institutions, just from a competitive perspective, to follow suit.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I think just jumping in, our focus being more on the employer channel and working with employees than it is necessarily banking or credit union. Kind of have banks in my history and background. I do see kind of community banks, credit unions, those that are focused around, around communities and serving communities, really being in a position to use financial health as a point of delivering an overall customer experience that just exceeds anything that their members can get anywhere else. And so I really do think that, there are credit unions out there that are starting to tap into it. And I'm sure, Maria, that your organization sees that, but I see that on the surface level as an area where, there can be a point of differentiation for those that are looking to adopt ways in which they can promote and help people, get ahead, right, by kind of taking that financial health angle, right? And whether it's, helping people, with emergency savings, or whether it's starting to tackle high interest debt, there's just different ways, I think, that those types of organizations, beyond just eliminating fees, could be working with people to deliver solutions and an experience that sets them apart.
Well, and you could also make a business case too with financial well-being, Clayton. I think, right now, low-cost deposits are a big driving force for banks and credit unions. You could make the argument that if you provide the right kind of financial education and convince people that saving money is a positive thing, that could also help banks that are also in need of those kind of low-cost transactional deposits as well.
Look at the lifetime value of the relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you can help people start from, I always use the analogy of, at least from an employer perspective, that employers are usually focused on filling the bottom tier, the champagne glass tier at the wedding, which is usually 401k, right? If we focus on filling that top glass, and if banks and credit unions and financial institutions can focus on meeting people where they are, filling that top glass, the spillover effect, right, and the lifetime value of that person as a customer and a client forever, is worth something at the end of the day, and worth a lot more than, just the little things that they're often helping people with today.
Great.
To build off of Clayton's remarks, we also saw Bank of America create a new program to upskill 60,000 of their frontline staff. And I think this touches nicely on your point, Clayton, about building a better customer service experience and really enabling and empowering these frontline workers who work at B of A to really understand the full suite of products and services that they have available to offer to their customers and clients, and knowing kind of which product and service might be right for that particular individual. So again, it kind of comes back to, large financial institutions are also employers and can also be doing things for their own employees. This is obviously customer facing, but we also see banks thinking about the financial health of their tellers and frontline staff as well. So lots of opportunity.
Yeah, their employees need to be confident in their own financial well-being before they can help people with their financial well-being.
Yeah.
And also we make a big presumption there that the ones at the sort of the bottom of the ladder that are paycheck to paycheck, that they even have a relationship with a financial institution. You start to think about the tiers. There are those that are paycheck to paycheck. There are those who paycheck to paycheck with institutional relationships, and then on up the ladder. I think the conundrum there is somebody, I can't remember if it was Clayton or Maria, said meet them where they're at. A lot of times we simply don't know where they're at, or the institution's not the best one to know where they're at, perhaps the employer. So the question is at an employer level, you mentioned 401ks and how we've gone from opt-in to opt-out and mandatory enrollments and things like that. What's the next step to move higher, in your analogy, to the top of the champagne tower, as opposed to just focused on the bottom of the tower?
John, from our perspective, for us, really it's about helping people identify what's most important to them, right? And understanding, where are you today? And by having connectivity of data from all financial institutions, or most financial institutions coming in, we can quickly look through and understand kind of, one, where are the biggest gaps, but two, by asking the end user kind of what's the biggest gap to you, right? We can start to pinpoint and understand what is that top class. The other side of it too is we understand from a motivational psychology perspective that not everybody is going to be motivated, right, to take that next step or take the first step even. And so you can't really help people who aren't ready to be helped, right? But you can be there to be ready for when they are. And so it's working with employers, in our view, to consistently kind of identify those who are ready, give them the tools, right, that they can kind of match up against with, whether it's debt, repayment, savings, etc., and help walking them through to take the next best step for them. But you're thinking about your comment around, we often don't know. We still won't always know, right? And that is a challenge, but it's about being ready to meet people who are ready at the end of the day.
And Maria, I didn't know, you looked like you were going to jump in. Did you have anything else you wanted to offer before we move on?
I can. Just to build, I really appreciated John's point about let's not assume that everyone has a relationship with a financial institution. We have, to your original question, Paul, about what can FIs be doing, we've seen other banks even open up their ATM network to like Black-owned minority deposit institutions. So community banks, where, they have a much deeper relationship with those communities that they're serving. And yet, are there ways that they can still take advantage of some of these technologies at scale that larger FIs are able to afford and to have? And can kind of see some interesting partnerships happening even between large FIs and some of these more community-minded institutions.
Right. Well, before we keep going, I'm going to make sure I keep up with some of the questions that are coming in. So, John, one question that came in for you specifically, and I'll see if I can just, make sure I convey this properly. They're trying to. The question is really just how does your program at the university kind of balance talking about the fintech side of things, but also traditional banking. We see a lot of banks working with fintechs, whether it's the referrals going one way or the other. But how does your program kind of balance discussing the fintech side of things with the traditional side?
Yeah, so we have in our core curriculum, there is a course that covers sort of traditional bankings and traditional capital markets, and kind of the legacy financial structure, if you will. And then we have another course that gets into fintech business models and economics, where we talk about some of the things that are being done vis-a-vis, like the Venmos and the Stripes and the PayPals and the fintechs. And in those two, there's usually organic conversations about where there's connections, where there is synergy, where there is consolidation, mergers and acquisitions. That's all part of the overall dialogue. And it's a great question because when you first of all, there's not that many fintech school academic programs out there yet. There will be, just like we saw with business analytics 10, 12 years ago. But we were really, really deliberate about having a business focused side of the core along with the enabling tech side of the core, and really keeping that balanced. And it goes to the point of, do we want to focus so much on the tech that it's all about fintechs and we forget about traditional capital markets and money flow and things of that nature? Or do we focus so much on the finance side that it's essentially a master's of finance with just a dab of tech, and never the two shall meet? So we are constantly within our core and within our electives looking to connect those dots so that students understand the give and take of a traditional bank versus a neobank, a community bank versus a credit union, some of the things that some of them can do versus things that other ones can't do, and what are the pros and cons of all that, and who's the end consumer, and how do we target this constituency with this business model versus perhaps a high earner, high net worth individual, with an entirely different infrastructure. So we spend a lot of time on that in our core.
Great. Let's go back to kind of what we were discussing earlier about the role that financial institutions can play in financial well-being. Is there, from your experience, are there particular products or services that really serve as a good entry point, particularly obviously for the demographic groups that maybe don't have a banking relationship? Do you start with the education? Do you start with a basic, say, checking account? Obviously, you've got a lot of fintechs that are really being introduced to buy now, pay later, and that's a lot of how people are being first exposed to the process. I mean, from your experience, what's the order of operations? What's the best entry point, and how do you evolve somebody through their financial journey?
For me, it's early in school. It's pushing down the understanding of the ecosystem and pushing that down. And I'm sure their answer is going to be somewhat similar. The further down you can get that, not everybody goes to college, not everybody finishes high school. So I remember when I was young, I had a course, and it was it wasn't home ec. It was just like a social studies course where we learned about checking accounts. We learned how to do simple taxes. And that was in 7th grade, 8th grade. I think it needs to be at that level. It may be, I honestly don't know for many, many schools, but I think it needs to start at that point.
We're big advocates at Financial Health Network around measurement. As Clayton has said before, our financial lives are so complex and nuanced, it's hard to give kind of a one-size-fits-all roadmap for any entry point into financial health. So we really advocate that providers of all types really measure where their customers are at and kind of do a diagnosis. We take a lot of analogies from kind of the healthcare space. So really looking at those vital signs to kind of see, where can you really drill down initially to kind of help a consumer progress along that financial health journey. Are they having trouble paying down their bills, paying down their debt, building up an emergency savings account? Like kind of what's the fire that you need to address first as you help that consumer, that individual progress along. And even when you disaggregate data, you can, think about certain demographic groups that you may, focus on, but even within certain cuts of the data, women, for example, there's a whole diverse range of needs within that population. So, these monolithic groups, there's still a range of diversity and needs within that population. And I really loved Clayton's point about bringing in psychometric data as well and personality data and really understanding how individuals are hardwired and how you can set up the right tools and structures to help them get ahead.
just jumping in and kind of carrying on from what you just stated, Maria, we, from a psychometric perspective, for example, on the debt repayment side of things, we know that certain people are wired to be kind of faster paced and look for quick wins. And if we have that information, we know that we can put the snowball debt repayment approach in front of them, and it is more likely that they'll stick with that debt repayment strategy than if we were to put kind of the more logical approach of the avalanche approach in front of them. And so when you have that data and you can start to understand how people approach kind of their finances, then you can make sure that the right strategies are aligned to them. The same thing goes from a budgeting perspective. We know that there are roughly 4 different approaches to budgeting, and they behaviorally align kind of across cross sections. And so if we can put the right systems in place in front of the right people, that there's a higher degree of likelihood that they're going to stick with it over the long run. And so it still doesn't kind of go back to like, how do you address those who may be unbanked, right, or are underbanked, and how do you kind of find a way to work with them? But I think my point earlier was you can only work with those who want to work with you. And so if they want to remain unbanked, that's a choice that they're making. But I think maybe as leaders in technology and leaders in financial services, we need to think about, well, what are the barriers and the friction points that are keeping that person away from some of the tools and solutions that could be helping them, and starting to look at it through that lens of more kind of what are those friction points and how can we remove them and amplify the benefits so that they do come along and they do start to use some of the great things that are being developed.
Yeah, and I think one other thing that we don't want to lose sight of, it's kind of twofold. The first is, and this has been a phenomenon over the last 10, 15 years, this general distrust of institutions. So when you think about the unbanked or those not affiliated, not just banking institutions, financial institutions, but all institutions, we saw that, government, CDC, WHO, everything that we've seen over the last few years, there is a genuine discontent and distrust out there about that. And then the other aspect of sort of systemic issues, I would call them, are things that are just simply out of control. And for example, in Connecticut, we just saw a doubling of our electric rates. And I have a friend that she just got a bill, an electric bill, a $1,300 electric bill for about a 600 square foot apartment that was a quarter of that as recently as a year and a half ago. And so, when you look at these people and meeting them where they're at some point, they just throw their hands up and say, I can't keep up this onrush. And what are the systemic safety nets that are out there that even gives them a chance to contemplate financial wellness or financial discipline or whatever? I think there's a lot of people that think people who aren't financially healthy, it's because they overspend, they do this, it's all bad habits driven, and that's just simply not the case. It's oftentimes it's things that are well beyond their control, whether it's medical costs, utility costs, food, eggs, $10 a dozen, the things that we're seeing in the headlines today, where they just get so far underwater that it almost becomes comical to them.
John, you're bang on. It is often the unexpected, right? It's the things that people they don't necessarily see coming that kind of throw a wrench into their entire plans. And it's one thing to talk about being proactive and building up emergency savings, but when there are systemic issues like the one that you just brought up around utility bills, that is something that even as well planned as you might be, that coming out of the blue is a massive change, right? And will throw somebody for a complete loop. And so it is like, how do you, my initial instinct just sitting here is like, how would we get our hands on the data that would allow us to understand, right, that those rates have gone up and that person needs to plan to set aside more for that utility bill? Because utility bills are one of the hardest things to predict whenever you're trying to look ahead and plan ahead. They ebb and flow from month to month. When rates get changed, it changes everything. And so, is there a way in which, we can use technology to understand the billing ahead of time so that can be baked into kind of planning ahead from a budgeting perspective so that the right amount can be set aside, assuming that the right amount is even available, right? So The hamster's on the wheel in terms of like how do you build a solution around that?
Well, and you look at it too, what was it? I think I mentioned during our planning call, the Fed did a survey several years ago where they realized that a large percentage of the US population couldn't handle a $400 unexpected expense. Then you fast forward to last summer, where because of inflation, just in June alone, year over year cost of everyday goods went up $430 for the average American. So you look at that double whammy of you're already dealing with higher cost of living because of inflation. Then you get hit with an unexpected expense. I mean, you're going to certainly see financial stress there. And it's really difficult to have people primed to plan or save for that potential unexpected scenario.
Well, yeah, you got the shock effect, but again, the utility rates and stuff like that, that's a perpetual effect.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going away. And
right.
If they didn't have the extra $1,000 this month to pay the bill, they're probably not going to have next month because they simply don't make enough.
Right.
Not
so,
just
go ahead, Maria, please.
There's uncertainty on both sides of the balance sheet, expenses as we've discussed here, but also on the income side. If you think about the wage earners, hourly workers, uncertain about what wages are going to bring in a given week, in a given time period, just kind of adds to this challenge of being able to financially plan and be prepared for the future. So it's an uncertainty on the expense side, absolutely, but also for a lower income demographic, often uncertainty just with their nature of their employment.
Another thing that we talked about during our planning call, and I want to make sure we set a little bit of time about this is, and we've talked about it a little bit, that there is no one size fits all. There's no cookie cutter approach to financial well-being, whether you're talking about the elderly, or you're talking about demographic groups. Somebody put a question in here and asked, could financial well-being on the consumer side be applied to small business or commercial operations as well? Love to just talk about how, there's just no, catch-all, that each institution really has to come up with a spectrum of products or services to meet demand.
Yeah, I think from a tech side, when we look at a lot of the startups that we're either incubating at the university or whatever, Clayton used the term earlier, friction. It's really, if you reduce friction, cost kind of follows. If you look to reduce cost by simply lowering fees, that doesn't necessarily take out the friction and the frustration. So I think whether an institution or a fintech is consumer facing or company facing, to the extent that they can reduce friction and have immediate access. And I'm thinking of something like a Venmo. My dog groomer now, she takes Venmo. She likes it a lot better than credit cards. She doesn't have to swipe, doesn't have to wait. It's simply, I can do it in advance. And it's just nice, neat, and clean. And for her as an organization, that reduces friction. That leaves her time to be doing what she's supposed to be doing and not waiting for a credit card or a tap or a, please reswipe and all that. And those little moments, they add up. I think institutions, there's a lot of institutions out there, a lot of fintechs that have managed to crack that for the small business. And I see it all the time at some of the events that we attend.
Well, and even to that, you think about the buy now, pay later, pay in four platforms as well. Those things gained so much traction, not only because the pandemic pushed contactless payments, but because it was so easy to set those things up at the point of sale as well. Yeah. Now we're obviously sorting through a lot of the terms.
Yeah, we're coming down the other side of that, Mo.
but the idea is they found removing the friction first, and then all the other unpleasant stuff we're sorting through later.
Right.
Yeah. It's from the behavioral world, right? Removing the pain of paying, right? Making it just easier. Right, that psychology, kind of the way that we look at it is, it's easy up front, right? To go, okay, well, yeah, I'll pay this in 4 equal payments, but if you're not actually able to do it today, are you going to be able to do it tomorrow, right? And how are you actually setting it aside? And so, removing the pain of paying is making it easier for people to just spend, but it's not necessarily what's best for them at the end of the day.
Agreed.
On the kind of question about having or not having a one-size-fits-all approach, what we've seen across our portfolio too is an interesting blend of technology and human support, live support. So we have a couple of portfolio companies that have built out, a team of financial assistants, live people who can chat with you on the phone or by video just about your own personal financial situation. Kind of seems counterintuitive when we think about kind of the advancement of technology. Why are we kind of going back to having someone that can be on the other side of a phone call? But again, like coming back to some of the themes across this conversation, our personal lives are just so complicated and nuanced that sometimes what you need, especially in an emergency, is just somebody who can, really get some of that detail that filling out a survey or some other form just isn't going to capture and isn't going to give you the best, most personalized recommendation for you. I certainly hope that with the shift to open finance, that we will get there, that we will have richer data, more diverse data about consumers, with all of kind of the consumer data rights and protections that go along with it. But I hope that we'll get there. But right now, we have just seen some really interesting use cases of kind of elegantly merging technology with some type of limited live support.
Actually, it's really interesting because it's one of the things that we're exploring at Finwello right now is how can we use what we know from a psychometric perspective around people's communication styles and their learning styles to partner them with a financial coach that's behaviorally aligned with them, right? To just kind of make it that much easier for the two to be in sync and open up and have those so oftentimes difficult conversations around their financial situation. I mean, money seems to be the last real taboo at the end of the day, right? And oftentimes people don't want to open up and talk about it. But if you have somebody who you trust, who can talk about things the way that you seem to approach them or want to approach them, you're just all the more likely to open up about it, right?
And I know again, to piggyback off Clayton, your comment about data. And that, by the way, we have about 10 minutes left, so it's a great opportunity for people, if you have questions, to put it in the chat. We'll try to make sure we go over those before we wrap up. And I'm going to leave my email and LinkedIn in the chat as well, in case anybody wants to follow up. I'm sure if you guys want to as well, that might be a good way for people to connect offline. But how do you get back to the question, how do you measure or gauge the effectiveness of a financial well-being initiative? Is it seeing somebody's savings rate go up? Is it, how do you kind of know that you're actually getting through to that person and doing the job?
So from a data perspective, we have 6 different data-driven measures that we're constantly measuring across savings, spending, and borrowing. I know planning was one of the other kind of pillars from the Financial Health Network, and it's one that we're actively trying to find ways in terms of which we could develop out as well from a data perspective. Being able to gauge that and measure it from both a quantitative way, but also a qualitative way, allows us to see both in the data, are things moving in the right direction, but also qualitatively, how do people feel or think about their finances across those measures, which is really the core kind of 8-question questionnaire that the Financial Health Network developed. And can we identify areas where the data tells us, hey, everything is okay, but the person is going, I really don't feel good about my finances. And can we help that person understand and realize that, hey, actually things are okay, or vice versa. Oftentimes we might see people who are wired to be a little bit more lifestyle driven, kind of not really think about the details of what's going on in their financial life. And they may feel like, hey, everything's okay, we're making it work. But at the end of the day, the data is telling a completely different story, right? And there are cracks in the foundation. So how do we help them understand where those cracks are and start to find ways in which we can patch them and build a stronger foundation so that they can move ahead? And so it really is looking at it both, quantitatively, what's in the banking data, the transactional data, and what's in like the real kind of human data of how they feel or think about their finances. From my perspective.
And exactly what Clayton just kind of outlined is what we really look for when we're thinking about working with fintechs as part of our innovation programming, like really trying to better understand, like, what are the specific metrics? What are the KPIs that you're really focused on internally as a business, to really understand how your product is helping your end user? I think for a while, so many fintech startups were really, bent on growth metrics, engagement metrics. And now we've gotten to this place where we're realizing that that alone will not guarantee success as a business. And that, investors have to really be also expanding what they're pressuring some of their investees to be focused on. It's not just about growth anymore. It's, can you build a real business? Are people willing to pay you for this service? And customers are only willing to pay if you're providing value in return. And so what is that value? So exactly like having, specific KPIs that can really validate and support some of those hypotheses and actually show us in the data how your solution is doing that is exactly what we look for.
And I think from an academic perspective, when I first met Clayton in our prep meeting, he talked a lot about data and then psychometrics. And I know a lot of startups that I've spoke to at various conferences and all that, they have really strong technical vision, strong technical people, strong data, but they don't have that connection because they don't have the right people to help connect the dots that understand all of it. What I mean by that is unlike most quant programs that could really go after finance and business and engineering type students, we're after people who have degrees in sociology, who have degrees in psychology, who have degrees in linguistics, who might have a better understanding and a better connection of the day-to-day life of our constituents, as opposed to just a sort of generic data first structure that really doesn't take into account the context of what a day in the life really means to somebody. So when you see institutions that are blending, behavioral economics with data and technology, and they have the people that can connect those dots and understand how they fit together to really contextualize the solution, I think that's when you get into Maria's point of now we have KPIs that make sense. We understand who our constituents are, we understand how to reach them, and we understand how to craft solutions that are data-driven and technology-driven that are meaningful to them. And as it's been said multiple times, not one size fits all. It's malleable and flexible, and that's a tough nut to crack. But I think the institutions that you see that will be able to do that will be the ones that will emerge, and those who are either just data driven purely without context, they will not succeed. Paul, you're on mute.
I'm going to let everybody have a minute to share like your final thought or your big idea for financial well-being. And while you guys think of that, I just want to thank everybody who came and attended today's session. We tried to get through most of the questions. See if you will try to, feel free to reach out to us offline if you have any other questions. And again, really appreciate the involvement with today's session. So, Clayton, you want to start us off with your last thoughts?
Sure, Paul. And I think it piggybacks off of what John was just touching on, that at the end of the day, financial wellness is about humans, right? Who we are, and it's very individual. And so, I do think that, those that get it right, whether it's us or anyone else, it really comes back to and has to be tied into what is that person, what are they going through, right? What's in front of them, and understanding the challenges that they face, the frictions that are there, and the goals and things that they want to achieve, right? And so it is tying it back into the human element and really, not getting lost in just the data and just the data. We have to remember these are real people's lives at the end of the day that we're all trying to improve and have an impact on. And that's really where the measure needs to be, is, how are we moving the needle in terms of the impact that we're creating?
Gotcha.
Go ahead, Maria.
Yeah, I very much second what Clayton said. I hope to see just a more personalized approach to financial services going forward, and letting the data kind of dictate what the consumer needs and when, not just using data to sell consumers something that the provider thinks that they will buy, but really understanding like where the consumer is, what is going on in their life, like contextually, what might be the best product or service to help that consumer continue to advance on this financial health journey. And whether it's in the shift towards an open finance network or some combination of still merging technology with human support, a more personalized approach to financial services is something that I hope we will continue to see.
And from my perspective, it's driving that next train of talent and getting them again to think context, technology, data, and how those pieces fit together. Think bigger, think with empathy, understand your audience, understand your constituency, and then develop solutions there. The hard solutions, not just the ones that are, suggested by a model, or, heaven forbid somebody wrote a question in Chat GPT and said, here's our new product, here's our new solution, but really to understand it. And I think to do that, financial institutions and definitely potential startups, really, they need to tap into a deeper pool other than just pure technologists and data folks.
Great, thank you. That wraps it up from our perspective. Any other closing words from our sponsors today?
I'll come on and say thank you to all of you for the session. Thank you, Paul, Clayton, Maria, and John, for an informative discussion today. And thanks to all of you who joined us. As a reminder, the recording of today's session will be available soon on the NFO's YouTube channel. Be sure to join us for the next presentation in NFO's Growth Garage on Wednesday, March 15th, for a panel discussion on the InsurTech landscape led by Brian Casey of Lock Lord. We just put the registration link in the chat a few minutes ago, so check that out and get in early. And the registration link will also be available soon on the NFO website at nationalfintech.org. Thanks again to everyone for joining us. Have a great day.